Welcome to Learn with Roblox. In today's video, we're going to do percent problems. Problem 1 says 6 is what percent of 14? To solve these sorts of problems, you need to set up a fraction. The number that goes in the denominator is 14. And the reason this is the case is because notice how it says 6 is what percent of 14. So this is the keyword you want to look for, of and then what number. And then if 14 is the denominator, 6 has to be the numerator. And then once you have that fraction, you can turn it into a decimal. And once you have the decimal, you need to multiply it by 100%. Because to convert from decimals to percents, you multiply by 100%. So if you can do this on your calculator, do 6 divided by 14 times 100%. And if you do that, you'll get it's roughly 42.85%. So this means that 6 is 42.85% of 14. Let's try this one now. It says what percent of 29 is 78? Set up your fraction once again, and notice that the of number is 29. So that goes in the denominator. And 78 will go in the numerator. Set up the fraction, turn it into a decimal, and then multiply by 100%. If you do that on a calculator, you should get that this is roughly equal to 269%. So what this means is that 78 is 269% of 29. In this problem, we have what is 290% of 3. To do this problem, you first need to convert that percent into a decimal. To convert a percent into a decimal, just divide it by 100%. And if you do this, you'll get 2.9 as your decimal. Now with that decimal, all you need to do is just multiply the number 3. So we have 2.9 times 3, and that's equal to 8.7. So this is saying that 290% of 3 is just 8.7. Let's try this one on the bottom. It says, what is 25% of 340? To do this, once again, just set up the percent to decimal conversion by dividing by 100%. And then this will get you 0.25. And then now, all you need to do is just multiply by that number. So we have 0.25 times 340. And if you do that, you'll get that the answer is 85. So this means that 25% of 340 is just 85. So it's a lot of problems like this. Just turn the percent into a decimal and then multiply that decimal by whatever number you're given. This problem introduces a new concept, and that is percent increase. This problem says what percent increase is 5 to 15, and it says what percent of 5 is 15. Let's tackle the first part of this question. To do percent increase, we need to talk about the formula. So the formula for percent increase is, it's the change in the amount divided by the initial amount times 100%. So let's find these values. The initial amount was 5 because we started at 5. It says 5 to 15. So that's our starting value. For the change, you can just simply subtract the final number and the initial number. So this would be 15 minus 5. And 15 minus 5 is just 10. And then now, 10 divided by 5 is just 2. I was about to say 200. And then 2 times 100% will get you 200%. So this means that 5 to 15 is a 200% increase. Okay, what about the second part where it says what percent of 5 is 15? To do that, remember, you just simply set up a fraction where the of number, 5, goes in the denominator, and the other number goes in the numerator. Okay, 15 divided by 5 is just 3. And 3 times 100% is 300%. So this means that 15 is just 300% of 5. Now, what do you notice about these numbers? Notice that they're off by 100%. So percent increase is not the same thing as percent of, but here's the relationship that you can learn from here. If you have an X percent increase, I'll just draw increase with an arrow like that. This is equal to having 100 plus X percent of a number. Oops. So this is an important relationship between percent increase and percent of a number. It's off by 100%. And this will be important for some future problems I'm going to go over. Here we're dealing with percent decrease. It says what percent decrease is 1500 to 321, and then the follow-up question is what percent is 321 of 1500. So we need to talk about the percent decrease formula. And the nice thing is that it's the exact same as the percent increase formula. The only difference is that you're going to say decrease at the end. So remember, that formula was the change in the numbers divided by the initial number that you started with. And then that fraction will turn into a decimal, which you just multiply by 100%. So the change, to calculate that, that's just 1500 minus 321. That's the difference between those numbers. And then the initial number you started with was 321. And then 1500 minus 321, that's a difference of 1179. And then if you do 1179 divided by 321 times 100%, what you'll find is that the percent decrease is roughly equal to 78.6%. So I'm going to put a down arrow to indicate that this is a decrease. Now let's find what percent is 321 of 1500. To this question, just set up the fraction again. It says of 1500, so that's our denominator. 321 goes in the numerator, multiply by 100%. And if you do that, you will get that 321 is only 21.4% of 1500. So now, what do you notice about these numbers? I want you to notice that 100 minus this 78.6% decrease gets you 21.4%. So in other words, here's the relationship for percent decrease and the percent that's left. If you have an X percent decrease, what this means is that you have 100 minus X percent remaining of a number. And in this problem, after you took out 78.6% of 1500, you're only left with 21.4% of 1500, which was 321. Let's move on to the next problem that applies these ideas. In this problem, we have that the price of eggs has gone up by 240%. They used to be $3.25, and we're asked how much are they now? What you need to realize is that if you have 240% increase, or a 240% increase, remember, this is equal to having 100 plus 240% of that initial number. So in other words, a 240% increase corresponds to the price being 340% of what it was before. And the initial cost was $3.25. So all this problem is really asking is, what is 340% of $3.25? Now to solve this problem, first convert that 340% into a decimal by dividing by 100. And that gets you 3.4. And then now, all you need to do is just multiply the cost, which is $3.25, by 3.4, since that's our multiplier. And if you do that, you'll get that the cost of eggs now is $11.05. Let's go to the next problem. In this problem, we have that after 30% discount, item costs $10, and we need to find how much this item initially cost. First thing I'm going to do is set the initial cost as a variable. Let's just call it X for now. Now let's deal with the 30% discount. If we have a 30% discount, that's like a 30% decrease in the price. And remember, to find what the resulting percentage is afterwards, you just do 100 minus 30%. And that means that after the 30% discount, you'll have that only 70% of the price, the initial price, is remaining. So in other words, 70% of the initial cost of the item, which is X, is equal to $10. To solve this problem, let's first convert 70% into a decimal. So 70% divided by 100% is just equal to 0.7. So that's our multiplier on X. And now we just have 0.7 times X is equal to $10. And then finally, to solve for X, just divide both sides by 0.7. And if you do that, you'll get X, which is the initial cost of the item before the discount, is equal to $14.29. Let's go to the next problem. In this problem, we have a man loses 20% of his money. He then loses another 30% of what he had after the initial 20% loss. What percent of the starting amount does he have? Your first instinct might be to think that 20% plus 30% is 50%, so therefore he lost 50% of his money, but I'll show you why that's not the case. Let's do this in two steps. Let's first compute how much he has after the 20% loss, and then after the 30% loss. Let's say he starts with X dollars. If he loses 20% of his money, that means he has 100 minus 20%, which is 80% of his money remaining. So if he has 80% of his money remaining after the first loss, that's just 0.8 X. I just converted 80% into a decimal and multiplied it with X. So after the first loss, he has 0.8 X remaining. Then let's do the 30% loss. For the 30% loss, he would have 70% of whatever money he has right now remaining. And then 70% as a decimal is just 0.7. So this is the multiplier now on the money he has. And notice he doesn't have X money right now. He has 0.8X money remaining. So what I'm going to do is 0.7 times 0.8x, because that's how much money he has at the moment. And this tells us how much money he has now. So 0.7 times 0.8 is 0.56. And then this is 0.56 times x. So that's how much money he has at the moment if he started with X dollars. But the problem is asking us what percent of the starting amount does he have? And remember, the starting amount is just X. So this is just a percent of problem, and we can do these pretty easily. You just erase a bunch of stuff here to make some space. To do a percent of problem, just set up your fraction, and then the of number, which is of the starting amount, goes in the denominator. In this case, it's just X. And then the other number is just how much we have right now, 0.56x. And you multiply it by 100% to get how much money he has remaining. X and X cancel, so this is just 0.56 times X. And if you do that, that's 56% of his money remaining. So notice that this is not equivalent to a 50% loss. Instead, this is a 100 minus 56% equals a 44% decrease in his money. The reason that is not 50% is because the 30% decrease was on an amount that was smaller than x. This problem says that a $50 game has a 25% discount applied. Then a 7% sales tax is added. What's the final cost of this item? To do this, let's do this in two stages. First, let's find out how much the game costs after the discount, and then let's apply the 7% sales tax afterwards. So let's do the 25% discount first. If you have a $50 game and you apply a 25% discount, that means that you only have 75% of the cost of the game remaining. So the cost after the discount is just 75% of 50. And to do that, just do 75% is 0.75 as a decimal, and you multiply that by 50. And this means that after the discount, the cost of the game is $37.50. So let me just write down that it's after discount. But now we need to apply the 7% sales tax. So let's do that. The way to think about that is that a 7% sales tax is a 7% increase in the cost. If you have a 7% increase, oops, let me drop percent there. This means that the cost of the item is going to be 100 plus 7%. So in other words, that's just 107% of $37.50. And to compute this, just convert 107% into a decimal by dividing by 100%. And that's 1.07. And then just do 1.07 times $37.50 to get their cost at the end. And if you do that, you'll get that the final cost of this item is just equal to $40.13. Let's move to our final problem of the day. Our final problem says that when x is increased by 27%, it becomes 100. What is x equal to? To do this problem, just recognize that a 27% increase is equal to having 100 plus 27% of a number. So that means a 27% increase is equal to having 127% of x now. And we know that 127% of x is equal to 100. To solve this problem, just first turn 127% into a decimal by dividing by 100%, and that's 1.27. So that's our multiplier for x. So then we have 1.27 times x is equal to 100. Just divide both sides by 127. That cancels, and you're going to get that x is simply equal to 78.74. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Thanks for watching.